All right. So session 2, we covered a lot of stuff in the first intro slides, or session 1. So we kind of ran through a lot of stuff really quick, and I don't expect I don't expect everybody to remember everything that we touched on. It was just kind of like, here's what things are and some terminology. And then now the better way to learn programming is kind of more hands-on. So if you're able to, during the session, have like Replit website open, it's going to benefit you more to do that. Sorry if it picks up that train. There's a train coming by. I don't know how loud that is on mic. Yeah, it's going to benefit you to be using the Replit and trying to follow along at the same time. I think some people might have tried getting in through the old email. Yeah, I figured as much. I tried and couldn't, saw it on Slack. Yep, that's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping everyone like tries to join through the email, sees a problem, and logs into Slack and is like, hey, and checks the Bootcamp preps channel. Hopefully that's what happens, because we are missing quite a few people right now from the list that I'm supposed to have. So, all right. Yeah, if you can follow along from your machine, I'll try to leave like either the slides up or my own code REPL session. So, you know, if you're only working from one monitor, it's fine. I'll try to go slow, or I can go back, or you can ask me to go back or something. That train, luckily it doesn't come by too often. It's once in a while. All right, so I added a couple slides to session 2. If you've already reviewed some of the slides from yesterday, I added a few today, like a few hours ago, just because I felt like maybe it was necessary to touch on REPL, its website, just a little bit, since it's probably new to a lot of folks. So yeah, let's do that. So a few more terms. You're going to hear console and shell, and obviously interface. And this is kind of what the Replit website looks like when you start any REPL or any console, right, inside their interface. So this is generally what you start with. This is generally what you start with right here. You just get this blank. They give you an index.js file from the start. You have a run button, a console, and so basically anything that you write in this file right here, it's going to try to run. It's going to try to run it as JavaScript. If you click this run button, if that is valid JavaScript that you wrote, it will run it. If it's not valid JavaScript, or you made a mistake, or you have a typo, you'll likely get a bunch of red output, and it will say something failed. Like you'll have they call it exceptions. They're just errors, and it usually means your program crashed for some reason. And a lot of times it's just like a small detail, like I was trying to make a string, but I opened with a double quote and I didn't close it with the double quote. I closed it with a single quote. That would cause an error. It's very picky about, a lot of languages are very picky about what they do and don't like, or what they will accept and won't accept. And we have code editors to help us mark things. Later in development, you will learn things like development tools and things that will help you write your code better, or help you find errors before you ever run it. So right now we just have this console, and this console, it will help us a little bit, but it's not a full development environment, but it's got some features to it. But this is what it will look like. Mine is in dark mode. There's a settings icon right here. When you have it open, if you click that, you can actually swap from light to dark mode if you want to like preserve your retinas. If you code in the dark or anything. Dark mode is like most of the time. I've only known a few people to use like the white, like the pure white background IDEs with their own preferred colors. And man, that thing it's hard to look at sometimes. Just getting blasted by your monitor with, you know, really, really bright light. But if you want to change that, you can do it in this, this settings gear icon right here. I can actually go into that. I have a REPL session open behind this slide, so I'll be doing that. I'll go through some of these menu options before we get too far. But it is behind here. All the rest of these things, like these other icons. Oh, you are correct. Thank you. I really need to put this somewhere in a better spot. Sorry, there's a waiting room and I have to admit every single person in so they can see anything. Is there a way I can turn this off? Maybe. Yeah, I won't worry about it. I'll just have to make a thing to check it. It's not letting this person in. Sorry, Tony, it's trying really hard right now to let you in. All right, so all these other icons, this is like the fork icon, and this is like a packages icon, and you can hover over each one of these. I'll tell you what it is. You don't have to worry about them. You probably won't even use them. I don't think you will. I don't think you will use any of these at all, because this one is for repositories on GitHub, and these are packages for Node, and this is a database. And we're not going to work with any of those things. You're literally going to work with the file icon and maybe that settings icon if you want to move things, if you want to move and change this interface around. So the first thing to know about this REPL is that this run button is tied to this console. So if you click this run button for you, when you click this button, Replit is going to run this file for you. So it's going to run index.js for you. You don't have to write any shell command to run it yourself. It's just going to go ahead and it's going to clear the screen and it's going to run. And if you have anything that outputs anything in here, like any code, lines of code that output, it's going to output into the console whatever you put. So console.log is going to be your friend if you want to debug your own code and see what a variable is holding or check what a calculation looks like as you're working through it. Some more people are joining. And for some reason, it is not. If anybody has Slack open, or let me just check myself. I hate stopping like this. Connection timed out. Yeah, Tony is having a hard time getting in. It's not letting him in. I'm admitting. All right, so yes, clicking this run button, it's gonna automatically run this JS file for you in here. And this console is already a Node REPL, as I have down here. And a REPL, all a REPL really is, it's a way for you to it reads, evaluates, prints, and loops. So it's just a console, and it sits here at this little icon waiting for input to read. And that's what you give it. You give it a statement, anything that's valid JavaScript, it will read it. It will read that line in as input. It will evaluate the statement you're trying to make, the thing that you're trying to tell it to do. It will print. It's going to print out some the result of that statement, basically. So if I did 1 + 1, it would give me a print back of 2. It would say that is my return value is 2. And then it will loop. So it will cycle back to the top to read again. So it will always give me back my like input line as long as I'm not stuck in some kind of a loop, like a while loop or a for loop, the things that we talked about yesterday. If I'm not stuck in an infinite kind of a loop that I've maybe written inline in this console myself. But yeah, so this is basically, you can use this way if you prefer. There is the other way, which is the shell over here. The shell is really a bash shell. And if you're familiar with your Mac terminal or a Linux terminal, it's the equivalent to that. You can run bash commands like ls, or I haven't tried all of them because theirs might be an emulated bash shell, so I could be lying to you. or it might be a full bash shell. But I can do ls, which is a Unix command or a Linux-based command. Sorry, more people are joining. It's a Linux-based command, so ls just lists the contents of the directory, so it tells me that I am in the folder where index.js is at. My shell is currently in that working directory. So if I say node index.js, it does the same thing as what the console did. So this is two ways to do the same thing. I'm explicitly running the file here. So I'm literally saying, hey, node, I want you to run this JavaScript file, and it does. And you see that it skips this like REPL session. It doesn't start a whole REPL session just to and keep me in it. It just runs the file console.logs, and then the program ends. This shell is kind of, if you attend the bootcamp, the self-paced or any of it, any development you ever do, it's probably going to be more based around a shell that you're using. So Windows command prompt or a Windows PowerShell or a Linux shell. A lot of times you're going to be working like this, and you'll learn the commands as you go. No one starts knowing all the bash commands, so you can learn them on the go. But if it's easier for you, for beginners, this run command is probably a lot more simpler to update your index.js file, update this index.js file, and then click the run button, and it will show you the result of your script. And this is probably, I expect a lot of folks will just use this because it's it's pretty easy to use. All right. Moving on. Did I just go with 2 slides? No, that was 1 slide. All right. So all the things that we did yesterday in yesterday's slides, we kind of went over like basic data types and things like that. And we talked about var and let and const. And this is what it actually looks like in like syntax highlighted code. So our editor window, which is this window right here, we have line numbers and everything, right? So we can tell what line anything is on. A lot of times your exception error messages will give you an indication of what line your code failed on. So these line numbers are kind of important to have there if you ever need to debug where something failed at. And just kind of going down what I've written in here, single line comments and multi-line comments, this is how you write them. Like this is the syntax of how you write a comment in JavaScript. And this first one, I can't extend this past, it will only belong to this one line. If I put another line here and kept going, it wouldn't work. It would turn out like this white color in my editor, and JavaScript would actually try to run it. Anything that is a comment, JavaScript will ignore it. You can put like notes to yourself. And it's a really good idea to always write notes for yourself. You'll thank yourself later if you have a code file where you did something and you come back months later. You're gonna thank yourself if you wrote some decent notes about what something does, because coming back to code later, I could tell you that I've looked at some of my old code from a long time ago, and it's like, oh my gosh, what was I doing in here? I don't even remember. It's like, and then you have to like spend a solid, at least 30 minutes to an hour. It depends on how complicated your code was, just trying to make sense of everything you did again. But dropping in a comment or a multi-line comment like this, I can say, my function, it's doing this, and it's meant to return this, and like the purpose of this was so that I could solve this problem or something. Like you can be as descriptive as you want. You can span this as many lines as you want. JavaScript is still going to ignore it, and it's only going to read the lines that are not comments, basically. So you can end JavaScript statements with a semicolon. So normally you could put a semicolon. I didn't put this in here, and I probably should have, but I didn't end any of these with semicolons. But the way I learned JavaScript when I first learned was you always had to put semicolons at the end of statements. Like when I'm trying to set a variable, there would be a semicolon here. The the more important thing is to be consistent about it. So newer versions of JavaScript, you don't have to use semicolons. You can just, you can write it as you see it, kind of like this. It starts to look actually more like Python without semicolons. So Python doesn't use semicolons either. I gotta make sure I keep checking this queue. All right, so this is the 3 ways to set a variable. The most important part for y'all is like practicing just setting variables. Variables have to start with A through Z characters, like the very first letter, like V. It can't be a number. You can't start with a number. It can't lead with a number. It can start with any A through Z character. And these are all terrible variable names. Like don't name your variables names variable name. Pick a better name for it. But this was just to show you the formatting of creating a variable. So naming things is hard sometimes. So once you get along the way, like you're gonna have functions that you have to name, variables that you have to name, objects that you're gonna want to store in a variable to give a name, and then you're gonna start naming everything. And eventually you're gonna be like, well, what do I name this? Because I already used that name. I don't want to reuse the same name because then I'm gonna have a conflict, right? So that comes with practice. But just try to avoid very generic names in your coding, and try to be consistent with the practice that you end up using. And this is totally like you're not going to know it at the start. Use whatever works at the start, but just it's going to be an iterative process. So here's the 3 ways. We don't really use var anymore. One second, letting somebody in. We don't use var anymore. We use let and const. And again, the difference between let and const. So let on line 14. Let will, it's hard to say this because we haven't talked about anything scope related yet, but we will be talking about scope in one of the sessions. So let will allow us to assign a value to a variable name, and it will keep it within, right now we have only one scope, which is like this entire file. We don't have any blocks, like function blocks, and that's where scope starts to get more important, is within the block of a function. So right now we're kind of just scoped at the same level as everything else for this, as far as this script is concerned right here. So this value is assigned to variable name. We can't write that line again. We can't write line 14 exactly the way it's written again. We can on the very next line write variable name 2 equals without the let, and do that's a reassignment, but we can't declare it with let a second time in this scope. So just something to note. Everything I'm saying here, I'm expecting that you are going to run into issues when you do this. Like you're gonna have errors. I hope that you have a lot of errors, because it's how you learn in development. Like crashing your program a lot, you're gonna learn a lot in the process. Like having to fix those errors is probably the best way to learn. So do not get mad at yourself if you're failing your code a lot. It's totally like you need to do it just so you can recognize errors. It's like one of the most important things I'd say for you to do is don't be scared to make your code fail. Const you can't reassign, you can't redeclare it. Whatever you set it, whatever you set that value to, it's gonna stay that value at this scope for the life of the program, or for as long as it runs. So that's understanding the difference between these two. So if you have a variable that you need to update, like increment values on, then you probably don't want to use const. Like if you're using some kind of counter that you want to start from 0, loop, and increment, you probably don't want to use const for that, because you're going to need to update and restore the updated value constantly in that variable. So a lot of folks will use function names. They'll use const to create a constant function name, because function names don't usually change. You don't usually, once you create them, they usually stay that name throughout your program. So a lot of times you'll see folks use const for functions. And of course, console.log, again, is going to output something to your console or to the shell, depending on which way you run it. And uh-oh, that's cool. For some reason, it didn't save the image that it shows it in the preview and it doesn't. I wonder if I still have it. I can open my code editor and probably just show you. But yeah, before we go to the next like formatting slide stuff, I'm just going to do that. I'm going to go to here. So the next slide was basically the rest of this. And let me increase the font size because I don't know how big. I don't know what kind of screen sizes everybody else is on, but I want to make this probably as big as I can get it. Just so it's no one's straining their eyeballs. All right, so we left off on console.log. So you can define your functions this way. It is considered the old way of defining functions. And you're still going to see this around in older JavaScript code. But a lot of the new code you're going to see written this way. And they basically are the same. They're formatted the same way, like they both are functions. They still both are functions, but this is the arrow syntax, like the ES6 way to write your functions. So if we were to run this file right now, as it is, all of this is valid JavaScript. I don't have anything in here that should cause an error. Even these extra spaces right here, compared to no spaces here. Like when JavaScript comes through, it's going to read this from top to bottom and run all of these lines because they're all valid JavaScript and none of it should error. So if I click run, we'll see in the console. Oh, let me put my pointer back on. How did I lose my pointer? Oh, because I'm not in the slideshow. That's why. Annotate. Let me not do that. I don't want to get stuck in annotate mode. All right, so when we run it, all we see is hello from index.js file, which is this line, right? Like line 18. And if you're new, the first question might be, if it runs it from top to bottom, how come it didn't run this console.log inside this function, or the console.log inside this function? It only did it one time. And coding languages usually, they store this name in the background. Like they don't perform the running of the logic that's inside this block right here. They do store this reference to this function. They say, hey, I have a function. It's going to have some code that I eventually want to run whenever somebody calls this function. Then it's going to run that logic. So I can put anything I want in here. JavaScript is not going to run it on its own. It's going to wait till I invoke or call that function. And these are the two terms that you usually associate to functions. Invoking a function or calling a function, it basically means the same thing. So if I come down here to the very, very last line of my code and I say old way, because that's its name, it doesn't take any parameters. I didn't define any positional parameters in here to pass it. So I don't have to pass it anything at all. And this is invoking or calling the function by its name. When I do this, now JavaScript should, not only should it run line 18, but it should also, it will see this call and it will come back up here and run this function. So it's on command. Anytime I want, I can say, call that function. If this thing is true or that thing is true, call this block of code. I want to run this specific block of code when something happens. So if we run that, now we'll see hello hello from index.js file. And then this output came from old way function, because that's exactly what I wrote inside of there. But we could keep like, now we have a reusable block of code, right? So if I wanted to, I could just call this thing as many times as I want, and it's gonna happen every point of the way, right? So 31, JavaScript is running from top to bottom. It doesn't run these blocks right off the bat. It waits for you to instruct them to run it. And this is like every one of these lines in order is how it runs it. And hopefully all that makes sense. Maybe I should stop right here. And if anybody has any questions about it, I'll give everybody a moment to ask anything you want to ask, or maybe just leave my screen up for a second so you can try it yourself too. But yeah, fire away if you have any questions. If not, I'll move on in a minute. And let me respond. All right. Nobody has any questions? All right. All right. So the next thing we can do, oh, well, I guess I can show you that new way also works. So new way, so we can call old way and new way. And we can see that this one will still happen. The old way and the new way function occur in the order that they were called in. So this is just specifically just calling, like storing a block of reusable logic. That's what functions are for. And then calling that logic at a later time, somewhere down the line when you want to perform a certain action, or maybe you want to perform that action a lot of times when there's a condition met inside of your loop or something like that. You can just create your own customized logic in here. Majority of the time, you're probably not going to be console.logging. You might actually start returning, if I could type, returning values, different values or calculated values outside of this function. For anyone that has worked on any of their...
Yeah, on line 30 and 31, could you still write the word function in front of old way and new way? Or that's kind of a shorthand way of leaving it off because it's already been defined?
Yeah, so this is... these lines right here are, yeah, they're defining, right? You're making them exist. You're bringing them into existence is how you can think about it. You only need to do that one time. So if I did it down here, it'd probably be a problem if I said function and then said old way. JavaScript is going to read this and think that I'm trying to write a function. And it's gonna think it's invalid because I'm missing like the rest of the body, the rest of the defining part of the function. So we can try it though. I can run it, and this is like the red error you would get, right? It says syntax error, unexpected identifier, and if we pick this apart a little bit more, it tells us what file. Actually, this is probably good to go over. It tells us exactly what file that ran. And then there's a colon, and then there's a number. And this number usually is associated to what line failed. And it says 32, which is the next line down. But it's really the end of this line. It says 32. The line, basically the line after old way is where it failed. Which might be a little bit confusing, but we know new way. We technically know that this one, I know that this one is right. Maybe you don't know this one is right, but this one is the correct way to call it. But I think maybe just the parser has a problem with the new line break that's here. But yeah, let me space these out a little bit more because it will probably still say, oh no, it still says line 34. So if I put the opening and closing braces here, I've never tried to make it fail this way, but let me put the opening and closing braces here and see if this error message changes at all. Nope, it's okay with that. But you'll notice it redefined, it actually let us redefine this function, but it doesn't do anything now. It actually, oh, I lied. Let me call it. We technically did a redefine, like we redefined the body of the function, if that makes sense. Like it's as if I just wrote a function and had nothing in there, which doesn't cause a syntax error. It's technically correct and it's valid to have a function that has no body in JavaScript. But if I was to run it, I don't get the output, right? It's not printing this output because we replaced it entirely with nothing, which that comes back to like using const. Like if I was to say, if we did the same thing to new way, right? If I said const new way, and then I tried to redefine new way, and I'll leave those there and run it. And now it says that there's an error on 31 right here. Syntax new way has already been declared. So const actually restricted us because it's storing it as a constant, and a constant you can't redeclare and you can't reassign. It blocks us basically. It says you can't do that. It's invalid. But these are good errors to know as a beginner. And when I say get familiar with errors, always look at these errors right here. Like you'll always have like index error, syntax error, programming error, something like that. And there will always be a message associated with it. Sometimes it will be a helpful message, and sometimes it will not be a helpful message at all. It will be like, you'll look at it and I have no idea what to even look at because this message is not helpful at all. And and a lot of times you'll have to like plug some of these messages. Like I could take this whole message right here, probably without new way. If I took new way out of there and I just use syntax identifier has already been declared and plug that into Google, I guarantee you I will find Stack Overflow posts. The most popular results I'll get is probably going to be Stack Overflow, and there'll be users talking about this error and why it happened. So that's usually a good first go-to. If you can't first look at line 31 and solve it yourself, if you can't just come down here and go, all right, this is what I did. What can I try to do to maybe fix it? And you might have to, it doesn't tell you that you know what line you already previously wrote it on, but if you read the message, it's already been declared. So you're gonna have to take it upon yourself to come. This might be somewhere at the top of your file, right? It might be at the very top. So you can't, it's not line of sight, you can't see it. So you might have to scroll through your code a little bit and logically work through it and find the answer. But yeah, that's a good question because it is, I think I've never worked in COBOL or Fortran, but I think you might have, I might be making an assumption here. Somebody here might be like a pro at COBOL or Fortran, have a background, but you might have to, are you asking that because that is something that you have to do in another language that I'm not familiar with? Where you have to say, where you have to specify function first because you're wanting to call the function?
No, I was just wondering if it would work either way. Like I was wondering if that was the shorthand way of doing it.
Okay, yeah. So this here, let me get this out of here because it's going to make things. So this is, yeah, calling it after it has been defined. So it's basically two steps here. And these two are the same. They're basically the same way to write the same thing. I could have called this old way. I just wanted to show that, the console.log only occurs when you call the function. How come no errors when not using semicolons on each line? You can do it in I know it's weird to me too. I'm used to using JavaScript with semicolons, but I can't actually tell you when it had changed. but it definitely changed. I could put semicolons on these lines, like all these statements that I'm making, right? And it should be fine still. Oops, I still have an error somewhere. Const old way has already been declared. Did I save it?
I have a question.
Sure.
How do you, well, I'm just taking an example for what the first of the challenges is, the full name.
Sure.
So if it's a function, so don't we define the variables in it? Like, we just, you know what I mean? Like for something like that, because we haven't talked about that.
Yeah, we haven't really gotten to it yet, but the function should be written for you, right? So it should look something like this, right? This is the first one you're talking about?
Yeah.
Right. So you have been given a function. Don't if you have been given pre-existing code in your challenges, don't change it. At least in the classroom side, because the tests will actually run against.
Oh, I deleted it. So yeah. I guess.
Yeah. That's a thing too. So actually, the class. So man. So if you're using the classrooms, this is the classrooms view, right? There's a run test that you can run in this dropdown, and if you run it, you can actually like inspect the errors that happen. Error unexpected, expected undefined to be Michael Jordan. So undefined is what happens when you have a function that doesn't return anything. So basically this is what's happening. If I run the test again, it's the same error. But if I change this to Chris and I ran the test, now it says expected Chris to be Michael Jordan, because that's it's testing the return value of your function. The test that's built into classrooms is doing that. You can't see the test, but it's basically going to call your function. Here, let me go back to this slide. It's going to, the test that they have in place is going to call your function full name and make sure that it equals Michael Jordan. So you can think of it like my return value that gets sent back. I know we haven't talked about functions yet, but they're basically going to do like this comparison where you say like my return value is equal to Michael Jordan, like this. My typing is terrible right now. And it's auto completing. So the test is going to assume that your function is still named this same thing, and they're going to call it. And if you change the name of this function, it's not going to work. But if it's still the same name, they're going to try to get your return value and compare what your thing returns versus what they're expecting. And that's kind of how that challenge is going to run, or in the classrooms at least. That's how this thing runs.
And if I delete it, is there where to get it back?
Well, you can physically write it in yourself, or I mean, anybody else can just send you what was there. You might be able to just pull up the.
If you go to the circled arrow, it'll reset it to where it was.
Yes, yeah. So they have a reset button in the interface. Sorry if the screen is really. Let me get the text a little bit bigger. So yeah, there's a. Yeah, thank you, whoever that was. Is that Patrick?
Yep, that's me.
Okay, sweet. Yeah. Yeah, in the interface, you have a reset button. Yes, reset my workspace. It looks like mine is back to what it was at. But if I actually, let me just delete it. And if I click reset, it'll put it back. So this was the state that you started with. But yeah, try not to change the function names yourself. If it does ask you to create a function and there is no current function there, usually it will specify what that name needs to be. So if it said write a function called full name, and it provided you with nothing, then you could write the function full name. And basically you would just read the challenge, right? Like, write a function. It it takes your first name and last name as arguments. This probably should say parameters. Arguments and parameters are used interchangeably a lot, especially at the intro level, but we'll say first name. I mean, you can name these are just local variables to the scope of this function. So if I could say f name, or you can name these pretty much whatever you want to name them, as long as they're valid variable names. They can't start with I can't start with a number. So f name, l name. So it has to take 2 parameters, and then now I have the empty body of my function. So you're almost always either going to return something. If it says return, like this one does, returns your first name, last name as a single string. But sometimes it says output or display, which really means console.log. I'm not sure how many challenges in here have console.log as what they're expecting. A lot usually rely on returns. So I would return the combination of the first and last name parameters. I don't want to give the solution yet either. So, but yeah, you would basically take these 2 passed in parameters and pass it in. And actually, if you want to test it yourself, if you want to like test yourself every step of the way, you can do exactly what I was showing in the slides, right? Like you can call your function yourself, and you can write console.log if you want. Like, so you aren't limited in here to do that. Like if for the moment, I can leave it as return an empty string because I don't know how I'm going to solve this yet, right? But if I run it, nothing happens. And in this console, if I run it, it just says undefined. I can call my own function, right? I call it, and I have to pass it the 2 parameters that need to go in. So I can say Chris and H. Actually, let me not pass these. So it still ran it. It still gave me back an empty string. They're not the double quotes, which is fine because single quotes and double quotes are both string data types, so it's fine. That's what it just preferred to give us back. An empty string. This is also an empty string. They are equivalent. If I say, I guess I could do that. If I say this, it says that's a true statement. That's a comparison operator, right? I'm saying is a single quote empty string equal to a double quote empty string? And JavaScript says that's true. So yeah, don't get tripped up on like if it didn't give you back double quotes here. So Chris and H, and I run it, it's still an empty string. But we can also do this, right? Console.log. And I can just say console.log, just the first name. When this function runs here, when I call it, it's going to run this block of code as many times as I call it. And if I run it, now it console.logs Chris. So it lets you see your output now. And this might be more helpful when you're trying to like figure out what your return value needs to be, right? So if I want to say, has everybody worked on this one already? I don't want to like spoil solutions for anybody, but there are 49. So I guess I can just cover it because it is probably something we're gonna have to cover pretty soon. So I'm just gonna do it now because why not? There's a thing called string concatenation. If you want to write that word down, it's a long word. It's called concatenation. New string. Again, this is not a very good variable name, but it is a variable name. So in REPL, which is, sorry, I'm totally missing the chats. So in REPL, which is an interpreter and shell, just for reference. Oh, you must have missed when we were talking about that. Yeah, we can go back over that at the end, or when this video is on YouTube, you can rewatch it too. So yeah, I don't want to go too far with time here. So yeah, concatenation is basically, let me ignore the parameters for the moment, and we'll just specifically do like these values in the same line. I hope everybody can see this. Hope that's good. So Chris is just a string, but the operator, the plus sign, lets us add. When the operator sees a string, like when the plus signs, when this gets evaluated and it looks at the left and the right side of the plus sign, it says, okay, these are both strings. I need to perform an action where I'm trying to add these two together. And when you're working with a string data type, and this is a string data type right here, is the things in the quotes, it's just strung together characters. When it sees this, when JavaScript sees it, it goes, I need to perform my operator, the plus sign, against these left and right values. And the left value is Chris and the right value is H. And it's going to try to like smash these two into a brand new string. And it's going to store the result of this operation. And the operation is the left. Everything that's to the right of this equal sign is the operation that's going to take place. And then the result of that is what gets stored into the left side. So if we ran this and I printed that out, and we can actually ignore this line. Actually, we cannot ignore that line because I have to call the function. If we run this, we'll see that I get Chris with no space. So it literally just took Chris and H, and then it basically created Chris H like that, right? And this is called string concatenation. So it's just appending to the end of the string, whatever the other string is. It just adds, appends it on. And you can actually chain these things together. You can keep going. I can say 2021, even though it's a number, it's inside quotes, so it's technically a string. So now I have Chris H 2021. So I can build a really large string if I want, but obviously this isn't what we want. I want to be able to pass in Chris as my first name, H as the second name, and I want there to be a space in between there. And you can literally represent a space as a space, like a space bar space, and then add it in, right? So if I was this is considered like hard coding right here. I hard coded these values in, they'll never change. Every time I run full name, it's always going to be Chris H, which also isn't what we want. But this is the result I want, right? Like I want this to happen with whatever I passed in here into these two things. Whatever arguments I passed in, I need this operation to happen because that's really what I want to happen at the end of the day. And we can do that because these are, I know we haven't talked about functions too much, but I feel like if I keep going, there's going to be questions about this. So these parameter names actually become variables within the scope of your function. They exist only during the life of the function call. So when line 10 happens, JavaScript comes through and it basically sets these variables. And when the return is hit, the values come out, and then those variables eventually, if they're in memory, they will eventually get erased at a later time by something I don't want to get into. It's a garbage collector, but there's an algorithm that somebody wrote somewhere, and it will come through and it will clean up and try to keep your code not sucking down all of your memory in your computer, basically. So once something gets dereferenced, like variables, it will do that for you. You don't have to worry about it because this isn't C. Anyways, so we really want these arguments that get passed in, whatever they are. They can be anything. It doesn't have to be Chris, but it could be like, we really want like Michael or whatever is passed in right here to go through. So if I run it, it's still Chris H. So all we really have to do is go, okay, F name and L name. I'm assuming when I call this that I will definitely pass a string because I know that's what needs to get passed. I'm the developer. I'm calling my own function. I know what to pass it. So F name is already a string, and I need a space after, right? I need F name maps to Michael because they're both the first. F name is the first parameter. Michael is the first argument. Michael's going to get stored inside of F name. So F name here is technically Michael when line 10 runs. So I just want to do kind of the same exact thing, but let's store it in that new string, and I'm going to get rid of this. So now it looks like this, right? So now we said, all right, these are going to be dynamically changing parameters. I can change these to anything I want now. And I'm going to still perform string concatenation because I'm assuming that F name and L name are still strings, which is pretty much decided right here. Like they are strings going in. So now if I print it, now I see Michael space Jordan, but I don't want a console.log anymore. Console.log was for me so I could see the return value. If I take this out and run it, and I return new string and run it, now we can see the result. This little arrow syntax is the return value. It's saying we ran it and it gave us back the return value. But we could have also technically have done this and ran it. And now it's console.logging a string, and that's why it turned white. And then console.log returns undefined because console.log is also like a function. But those are just subtleties. Don't get hung up on little subtleties like that yet. So full name, this is good enough, right? Like I called it, this is what I wanted. So now if I change this to anybody's name, my name, as long as there's strings, it'll work. But what happens if I change the data type? Aha, JavaScript still concatenates it as if it was a string. So what if we, this is kind of how you can play with your code, right? And say like what works, what doesn't work. What if I give it something it's, you know, like what happens if I give it something that it's not expecting, like an empty array? Like what happens to this stuff? That's kind of weird that it does that. I guess it's just converting to a string. The behavior between JavaScript and Python are so different. Yeah, but we'll get into arrays probably. I think it's next session. Is there any questions on this stuff right here? Hopefully I answered some of your questions. Cindy, I think you were asking about the function stuff.
Yeah, this is good. Mine was so much simpler. I just did, let me find mine. I just did return first name plus quote or space plus last name, and then did console log and got my name, and it passed. Is that?
Yeah. So you could, I didn't have to set this variable, right?
Okay.
Like I just did this so we could, so I could break it into multiple lines, but I could technically take this whole entire operation that happens, not store a variable. Like, why do I need to store a variable if that's all? I just want to return that operation. I could take out this comment. And so I could reduce it down to like this function that has one line and run it, and it would still return the string concatenation operation that's happening. But I could, I guess I can't because there is a string in there. But yeah, you can see how you can build, like we can use this function now to pass it, right? I can say, I don't want to get into grabbing inputs from the console yet, but I could store outside here any given name. And this is what code will end up looking like is, well, you might pull these names from another source, like a text file or database. They might pull in from somewhere else, and the value will be a string, and then you can just forward it in, right, by their variable names. Hey, like, hey, whatever you're storing, send it in, and we still get the same thing. Like if because I'm just basically passing by it's their labels, right? Like this is that value. But these could be more complex. These will eventually be more complex pieces of data. Like I might have a list, like some kind of list-like object that has a lot of students in it, right? So like I could have Chris and Cindy, and I'm sorry, I'm just picking whoever I see in my list. Right, we could have this is an array, we'll cover it next time in the next session, but I can have a lot of folks in a list like this, and then I could combine that with like iteration, like looping, like a while loop or looping. And inside my loop, I could pass forward this function call, and then I could print out, I could loop, my line would look like I call the function one time, but I'm inside of a loop, right? And I would basically iterate through every single name, and it would console.log, or maybe not console.log, but it would be running this function, and you could have it print out every single person in that list as you cycle through it. We won't do that right now because I don't want to jump too far ahead yet. I want to because it's fun, but I don't want to because it will get confusing. All right. Are there any other questions?
So one more time, if you don't mind, just
Sure.
revisiting. Like, so for this, of the numerous ways we went over doing this, when we did this option where we define the function and, full name, however, and then you'd use let to define the function.
Yep.
Full name, let's say, and then whatever the name is, first name, last name. And then why, I mean, I don't know, I guess I feel like it's kind of redundant to do let and then do console.log, but I was trying to take it out, but it won't run without it. It looks like it needs both, right?
Yeah, so.
And it needs returned.
So this probably looks weird also because I gave them the same names too, right? So again, JavaScript is going to run this from top to bottom. It's not going to run that function up there. It's going to like reserve that name in the block it's meant to eventually run, but that doesn't run until it's called. So it runs on line 9. Everything else happens before it. I have tools to erase this somewhere. Clear. That'll work. All right, so I also did something here, but this actually gets into scope. So right, this is a terrible color to use. Let me use red. These variable names that I said that the function sets, they are scoped to exist. They are scoped to exist inside of this function, which means they don't conflict with these. These are actually not even the same, right? Like when I say F name down here, it's not referring to that F name. Like I didn't have to make those match.
Right.
I do have to make these. Well, let me erase because this is going to get sloppy really fast. Sorry, I'm figuring out better ways to emphasize things here. This F name absolutely relies on that one, and this one relies on that one. So if those don't match, it'll fail. But and same here, like these have to match these ones. So those have to line up, but these ones here, they don't have to match what's up in the function because they're getting reassigned inside of the function when they're passed in. So you don't have to make, once you start learning, once we go more over functions and scope, you'll start to pick up on it, but it takes a little bit of practice before it really like solidifies in your head.
If I may interject just real quick.
Yep.
So in the function, just think of it as a bucket. A bucket isn't going to do anything until you put something in it. That's what the let and the full name, console log, all that stuff. It's what you're putting into the bucket. It's just holding something, but if there's nothing there, it's not doing anything.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
there's many buckets for the same thing. Does that make sense?
yeah, so also we've only called it once, right? So I could actually let me get rid of this in case that's confusing. Since I got rid of those, these won't work anymore because these aren't references in this outer scope. They might be references inside the function, but we can't carry on lines 4 through 7, they can't see what happened in that function. If there's variables set inside the function, it's scoped to that function. We can't see inside of the function from outside of the function, if that makes sense. Like this line doesn't know what that function is going to do. It's just asking it to perform a job. So if I do this, but I can call this as many times as I want now, and every single time I call it, it will perform this same operation. So it doesn't have to be Chris every time. It could be Tom. Sorry, Patrick, I'm picking on you. Here, we'll just do it the 3 times, right? So I run it, and now we see that like the REPL for this website is just returning the last line that ran, whatever the return value for this line was. And it's not really helpful on what's actually happening here. It doesn't show us every run that happened, but that's where console.log comes in every time. I can pass this entire function to console.log each time and say, print out the return value every time. So now we can see that 6, 7, and 8, this might be a little confusing, but the return value that's coming out of this call is getting placed right inside of console.log. And I could have separated this on multiple lines. Like we could, I could have done this, and this might be easier to read. These are just like our results, right? The first time I ran it, the second time I ran it, and then this third time. So this might be easier to read at first rather than passing a function call inside of another function call. But I could have done console.log first and done them individually like this. Sorry, I'm moving a little bit fast. So yeah, and if I run it this way, this is so, you can use console.log to debug all of your challenges when you're doing them. If you want to see the results of your actions, use console.log as much as you can. But most of the test cases are going to ignore this, and they're just going to grab your function. They're going to like reference your function and say, okay, does it return the value that we want? And so it's good, right? Like it says the test is good because the test cases in the classroom, the classrooms are going away on the 31st. So I don't want to like emphasize classrooms too much here, but the classroom has tests, which is really good because you can test your own code, but it's really checking this return value. It's referencing the function that was given to you by its name, just like the example. And the test is basically going to run a line that looks kind of like this, where it's trying to assert that, hey, if I gave your function these 2 arguments, I expect that this is what I'll get back. Which means that they can write this test. It doesn't have to be in Michael Jordan that they test. They could test any one of these, but the results should always be, the concatenation of these strings together. It's probably a lot to take in for the moment. If you haven't worked on any of these challenges yet, but does hopefully that makes sense. Writing it out this way, I guess. And just like a quick aside, you don't have to do separate console.logs. You could actually, you should be able to do all 3, and it will put all of them side by side with a space between them. So every comma, console.log knows, like it accepts, you can pass like 1 to a lot of arguments to it, and it knows how to print them out side by side. But for most people, you might want to see them on separate lines. So maybe you can't. Maybe you do it that way. Yeah, let's move on to this next slide because it's not too much to cover. And then formatting and clean code. It's good to talk about this now before you get too far into writing. Oh man, admit all. Sorry, you three who just joined. I'm not sure how long you were sitting there for, but that is my fault. You were stuck in the waiting room. Formatting and clean code. This is a good thing to talk about before you get too far with your and learning how to code. Because reading your own code is important, and then other people being able to read your code and help you is also important. So a few of the things that we can go over are proper formatting of code. I said this earlier, just be consistent. So if you're going to use semicolons, make sure you use semicolons through all of your code. Or if you decide not to use semicolons, then just don't introduce semicolons like intermittently throughout your code. It's just good. It's just really good to be consistent with that. And naming conventions for JavaScript, they tend to use camel case. So camel case is this, like, you start with a lowercase word, and if there's two words, you would like title case or uppercase the start of the next word. So it starts to look like here, let's see if we can write one. So you'll see that full name is doing it. So if I wanted to write a multi-word function name to be very descriptive about a function, I could say my super important function name, right? This is a terrible name. But you see how I led with all lowercase, and then each letter of the next word, like imagine these are all separate words, right? And you usually want to be descriptive of what your function will do. So don't write it like this, or this is kind of like the Python way to, whoops. This is the Python way. It's called snake case, which we're not doing Python. So don't write it like Python. Kind of stick to their convention, because you'll be following the same patterns as real developers. This is the convention they follow. So they name their functions in camel case, and you'll see it a lot. You'll actually see method names on, like, what's a good one? On a string, there's two uppercase like this. Let me make sure. I have multiple languages rolling around my head. So I can't believe it didn't autocomplete that for me. So like two uppercase, right? So it's all lowercase in the start, and then each word technically is the uppercase version. So this is kind of the convention to follow. You'll practice it. It's not like your code won't work if you don't do that. I could totally write this in all lowercase if I wanted to, and it would still run if I did it that way. It still runs. It's not going to break anything, but it's just kind of a nice convention to follow, so other developers can assume what you've done. Assume practices that you've made, that you're kind of following a general practice, general guidelines, basically. Yeah, and then variable names. Again, naming things is hard. You're gonna run into this. There's no way you're gonna avoid it. But it's like picking a name for some piece of data that you're trying to store. Sometimes it's gonna be easy, and sometimes you're gonna be like, I have no clue what to call this thing, and you're gonna pick a name that later you're going to find out was not a good name to pick. And it might end up breaking your code because you named it something that didn't make it clear what data type it was, kind of as a statement says. So if you called it something that implies that it might be a collection of things, but it's not a collection, it's just like one, maybe a string or one number, then yeah, you might treat it the wrong way later in your code, and you'll have to debug that error. So it's a good practice to come up with variable names. So I tend to do like pluralizations if it's a lot of something, right? So if I have a lot of students in a classroom or something like that, maybe those terms right there are good enough, right? Like a classroom might actually be an array of like, student names, right? Like there might be this collection type of student names, or maybe I could just call it students, right? Maybe that's a better name. So picking names for things like this, it doesn't seem like it's a big deal right now, but it will be later. It totally will be. Proper indentation and spacing. Probably, and it's important for readability for JavaScript, but I'm almost positive I could put this return statement all the way over here and run this. Actually, let me console.log at least one of these. And it still runs, right? Like, and I use the space bar. I could tab. Tab and spacebar are not equivalent. They are different. The computer recognizes them as different character types. Like if I tab versus a space, they're different representations. So it's a different type of a white space, basically. So if I tab this over instead of spacing and run it, it's still okay with it. I can put new line breaks for days in here, and it's still okay with it. It doesn't fail on white space. So, but this looks terrible, right? If you have code, I'm not going to want to read your code if it looks like this at all. Like I'm going to be like, why did you do this? You made it very inconvenient. So just pick something that you can be consistent with, right? So you can do like 1 space. It's kind of treading the borders. 2 space looks a little bit better. You could do 4 spaces if it makes you feel better about how it looks. But just be consistent. If you're using 4 spaces for blocks of code, then stick to 4 spaces. If you're using 2 or whatever the editor is defaulting to, that's probably fine too. The most important thing in programming, be consistent. Especially at this early stage, it's going to be hard to, because you don't know what everything is just yet, but you will get there. But proper indentation and spacing. This is going to be much more important if you go through the cohort and you start learning Python, because Python really cares about your white space. It kind of tries to enforce you to write your code in shorter readable blocks. But JavaScript itself, it doesn't care if you had like 6 spaces followed by 4 spaces. It doesn't care as much, but it's really for like anybody who comes in later to read your code. It's for their eyes, right? Like I want to see code that kind of looks like this. It's nice, right? It's just 1 line. It's pretty simple to read. Everything's like on the same line indentation level if it needs to be. You could have like an if statement in here. If something is true, now you'll see we went another indentation level deep, but it's the equivalent amount of lines here as it is here. So it's just following this pattern and being consistent is pretty much what that you want to do as an early developer, is just keep consistent with that. And again, there's tools for developers that you'll eventually get to in VS Code or whatever editor you, Sublime Text, or IDEs like PyCharm or anything like that. Anything that is an editor for coding languages, they usually have things built in that will help you keep consistency, because it will help you debug your errors faster too. And I think we're gonna stop there because the next one is session 3. But we're not stopping for the night. I'm still gonna be around until everybody's in a different time zone, I think. So for the next hour and 45 minutes, I kind of want everybody to go on their own. This is going to be a regular thing. Everyone just go into REPL or your challenges, basically, and work on code, and try to use some of these practices. Try setting variables, console.logging stuff out, make it fail, and do all these things, because it's also going to help you bring up more questions to me too, if you don't already have some. So it's really just going to be me. The rest of these sessions are going to kind of run like this. I'm going to talk at you and demonstrate some topic, arrays or functions or scope or something, and then y'all will just go work on some challenges. Maybe not for the full time. I think I really want to like let you go for an hour to go work on some challenges, but then come back and then ask all of the questions that we want to ask. So because I want to make sure I'm not just reserving us for 15 minutes to answer questions. That's not going to be enough time to answer. I know some of the questions that folks are going to have. I want to be able to demonstrate again for anybody who's interested. But if you feel like you know what you're doing and you know everything up to this point, and these are pretty solid for you, like you can just go keep working on your challenges. But I am going to be here for the next hour and 40 minutes. So I'm literally here for you to ask questions. So everyone can go work on their challenges. And if you feel the need, I'm still going to keep this Zoom room open for this time. And then you can pop in and ask questions in here. You can DM me in Slack to ask questions if you don't feel comfortable talking over your mic or working out a problem live with a bunch of students in here. But feel free, if you want to hang out in here, you can hang out in here too, work on some challenges. This is kind of how the cohort itself runs. So students will have lectures in the morning. This is like a mini version of that. The cohort will run in the morning and all the students will get their lectures and do some kind of practice within the class. And then later in the afternoon, they just spend the afternoon working on more complex challenges or building apps and stuff like that. And then they meet up at the end of the day to just cover, things they learned and, lessons learned or things they struggled on. But I don't want to leave it to 15 minutes. I kind of want to bring everybody back with a little bit more time, because I feel like there's more value in having you guys come back with questions. So
Chris, can we do something where maybe we come back at 8:20 and we work on problems 1 through 10 and then maybe go over some questions that way? So does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I'm willing to go over some of the problems. I just the only thing I don't want to do is spoil any problems for anybody. So I guess if everybody wants to like chime in votes in the chat or in the Bootcamp prep channel or something, we can totally go over a select few. Maybe if 10 is too much, maybe we can do like the first 5 or something. I don't want to spoil too many answers, because I know some people really love doing these challenges. And once you see the answer, it kind of just spoils the answer for you. But yeah, if anybody else is down for that too, we can. So I just don't know how far people have gotten so far with the challenges. I'm assuming everyone's kind of at a different stage. But yeah, feel free to chime in or say something in the chat. And actually, I missed so many chat messages, so maybe I'll run through these at the moment. But yeah, feel free to go work on your own. You can stay in the Zoom chat or come back to this Zoom chat. The Zoom chat's going to be open for the next hour and 40 minutes. And then maybe, what was it? You said 8:20. Was that 8:20 CST?
Yes, 8:20 CST, yeah.
Okay, so
anybody who wants to could come back and meet and go over the
yeah, sure. That's fine. And then each day I kind of want to just like we'll reconvene and cover some stuff. And then, if we end early, we end early. Because I never know. I just want to have enough time for folks to ask questions before I release you again. And I also don't want to keep everybody too late, because everybody's in a different time zone. So I'm just trying to be as flexible as possible here. So yeah, go ahead and go work on challenges. I really want everybody, if you're able to right now, is to go open Replit and just try to do one or as many as you can in the next hour. and write down questions or just pop back in here and ask questions. That might be distracting for some folks. So if you need to leave because the talking is distracting, if I start helping anybody that has a question between now and when we reconvene, you can, there is a way in Zoom to leave just the audio, but stay in Zoom. I can't show you because Zoom won't let me show you my control bar, but there's a down arrow next to the mute button, if you know where that's at. And there is a leave computer audio option, but you'll just have to make sure you rejoin the computer audio to be able to hear anything again. But it will let you stay in the chat, and then it will, you just won't hear us talking if it's distracting. I know that that's a thing for me. I have to do it all the time. So I have to leave if I'm helping somebody with code or coding myself. That's a thing. But yeah, feel free to either hop out for a little bit, work on stuff, and then come back with questions. I totally want everybody to ask questions if you have questions though, because it helps me gauge where you're at and maybe what needs to be covered better. But yeah, do that, and then we can cover challenges too if y'all want.
Sounds great.
All right, I am going to stop this recording though. On computer. Okay. All right. So our challenge is, I'm sharing and my mic is on and my video is on, and there's no one in the queue because I turned it off. Our challenge, write a function that takes in a number of minutes and returns a string of hours and minutes. So yeah, this is going to touch a few data types, and maybe I'll go through this and I'll just show you kind of mentally what I think when I'm doing this, and then totally stop me and ask questions on something that's not clear as I do it. Maybe we can stop. We'll see how that goes. I don't know how that's going to go, but we'll kind of wing it. I'm actually going to take this right here because I don't want to keep swapping back and forth. Oh, I did not fork it. I guess I should do that. Let's do that. Okay, so I forked it and now it's part of my account. So now I can actually copy this text over, and this is just so I don't have to keep swapping screens. So maybe one of these days we'll go over short keys, so you guys, so you know the shortcut keys where you can like comment a bunch of lines at once or something. So this is our instructions. Write a function that takes in a number of minutes and returns a string of hours and minutes. So number here, always looking for keywords inside your challenges. Anytime you do code challenges, the prompts usually have giveaways in it. So write a function, we don't have to do that. We've been provided with a function. So maybe that wording is not as good as it should be. Maybe it should say use the function that's defined below or something. So we're not going to change this function. We're just going to use it as is. And it takes in a number of minutes. It takes in, so a parameter, which has already been defined as well, so we don't have to write this. But it says number. And my first thoughts when I read this, since function's already written, and it says takes in a number, and I know in JavaScript there's a data type called number, right? Like there is a number data type. And if we remember anything from that, numbers are like integers, right? They could be any, they could be decimals or anything like that, right? They're just, that's their data type. They store a value that looks like a number, doesn't have any quotes around it. So that's the first thing that comes to mind. And you should always be aware, like session 1, when we were talking about problem solving and questions that you should always have on your mind when you're looking at a problem, is knowing what data type you're working with. So knowing what is going to be sent to this is important, because if I know what data type I have, then I know what kind of operations I can perform on it. So a number and a string. So I'm accepting a number, but my return value needs to be a string type. And maybe I can write comments in here for myself. So minutes is a number data type. And then whatever I return right here, it needs to be a string type. So, and this is me just like structuring and commenting what, just leaving notes for myself, like for expectations of what needs to happen in here, kind of like little reminders, right? Because this could end up being a pretty complex set of logic that we have to do in here. And it returns a string of hours and minutes. So we're taking minutes, and then we need to convert minutes into hours, if I'm understanding this logic correctly, or this problem correctly. So like step one, I'm thinking about this, but before I start writing any code, I just want to logically think about the problem and just kind of talk about it in human terms, I guess, like human words, how we would talk to each other about it. So minutes, I can assume, maybe a good assumption for minutes right now is, let's pretend that this was going to be 120 minutes, right? Let's go off of this assumption. Let's say that 120 minutes is going to get passed in, and that's what we're going to use for like our example I'm just picking an arbitrary number to see how it plays out with the next steps. And this is like problem solving 101. Even me writing these comments right now, it's a good practice to do for yourself, just so you can logically like de-layer this problem in code for yourself. So step one, I want to take minutes. So whatever minutes is, right now it's 120. So I would want to take 120 and I need to divide it. And if we go back to the first session, we briefly went over a lot of operators. One of them was the slash, right? So actually, I kind of want to show you what you can do, like all in this one interface right here. I can click down into this console. It's already open in a REPL, so I can literally type 120. It's a number. It's running JavaScript. It's just sitting here in an interpreter, like a REPL session, waiting for us to do JavaScript. So I can actually like test things in this little console right here. Make sure you're in console and not shell, because shell is bash and this is JavaScript REPL. So make sure you're in console. If I take 120 and I use the forward slash on my keyboard, it's right next to the right shift, or basically the same key as the question mark. So forward slash. 120 minutes, I would need to divide that by however many minutes are in an hour. So this is just like basic math, right? So if I divide 120 by 60 minutes, because 60 minutes makes an hour, like that, it says 2. Gives me back 2. It's also looks like it's a number. And I wonder if I do, hopefully this gives me, okay, so this might be a useful thing that you can use if you're ever curious what you're working with. It has quirks, but there's a built-in called type of, and this might help too. So it tells me what the type of something is. So if I give it a value and say 120, it tells me number. If I can give it the calculation of these two things, and it still says that thing is a number. And if I gave it a string of Chris, it tells me that's a string, because JavaScript knows what the data types are, and data types are the most important thing. You're always going to want to know what data type you're working with, because it's going to be probably what your error message is half the time. All right, so we know that if we divide whatever minutes is by 60, it should give us hours. So we've gotten one piece of the puzzle. So if I say, okay, I want to divide. So if I write it out in human terms, divide, which is slash, by 60, it should give me my hours. I keep saying human terms, but I keep writing like symbols for myself. It's a habit, sorry. By 60 gives me my hours, right? So this is pseudocode.
Chris, can you enlarge your
Sorry, I
screen?
don't have chat open. I don't know if anybody's chatting, but I forgot about that.
Can you enlarge the screen, please?
Okay.
So we can see the text.
So step one, we got the hours. Now we also need minutes, but we have minutes. But if you think about it, we just divided minutes by 60, so we got the hours. So 120, it works for this case, right? When it's a perfect, when we're dividing perfectly into the number. So let's take this out and say, okay, what if it was, let's just go one minute above that, right? So what if it's 121? One more minute. It's not a perfect, it's not going to perfectly divide into it. So 121, I'm doing it in the console now. Let me make this bigger. And let me clear the screen. So 121 divided by 60. So now we get not a perfect 2. Now we get like a float or a decimal value. Actually, yeah, a decimal value. It's still a number though. So still a number. But that decimal is going to be a problem, right? So if I was to get 2.01666666 repeating, this isn't a, the 2 is fine, right? I need the 2 for my hours, but this, I need it to be my minutes. And so we're going to have to use some other operator to get that, or we're basically going to have to say, all right, we need the everything after the decimal, or we need to do another kind of calculation to get that extra minute, because 0.01666 minutes it doesn't mean the thing that we want it to mean, or the thing that we need to return back in our string. Well, let me look at this again. And honestly, I should be practicing. So I should say 120. Oh, they did do 121. So this is ultimately the thing that we want to get out. So we want to get the 2 off, and then we want to get this 1 minute, and we want to pass in minutes as a number, but get back a nicely formatted, like a nice string that looks like this. Tells us exactly how many hours, how many minutes the thing is. So so we can do what other operators do we have? So we have the addition, we have subtraction, we have the division, and we also have modulus. So modulus gives us the remainder. We talked a little bit about it on session 1. So we can say 121 and use the modulus to get our remainder. And we want to say 60 minutes is still an hour. So we ask for the remainder of that, the division that we basically did above. We said we want the remainder from that same calculation, which gives us a 1. And I mean, that looks right to me. And in some cases, it probably is, but just because this value is right, we should probably test more cases. So let's look at another one. Let's say, all right, what if I did modulus against, let's test this one too, just to make sure that like we're not getting some edge case where I got a 1 back and I am assuming it's correct, because that's always bad. So let's try this out with 55 real quick too. So 55 divided by 60. The first number is the one that we want. We don't want the decimal. So we really need that 0 without any of the decimal, but we'll get to that. And then 55, we want the remainder of that, which is, it tells us it's 55. If we do modulus 60 against 55, it gives us back the 55. So we want the 0, and then we want the 55. So modulus probably is the thing that we want to use to get this number, right? And then, so we can say minutes modulo, which is the percent sign, by the same 60 minutes gives me my minutes. And so actually we need to rerun that first one, right? Because this is a problem. Did anybody come across any solutions on how to just not just get rid of this decimal as part of your
fixed? You could use a toFixed method.
I'm gonna pretend like it's a no, or no one wants to spoil it. That's fine too. So there is, what can we do here? Let's pretend like we don't know. We're stuck. We don't know how to, we're like, I really need that 0. Oh, can nobody unmute right now? Let me make sure it's not like permanently muting everybody. Sorry about that. Yes, that's, I'm glad you could hear me. Otherwise I've been talking on mute this whole time. Yep, that's good. Can someone try to unmute and see if you are able to unmute?
Const test.
Okay, yeah, I see you guys unmuting. Sweet. Yeah, maybe it starts it off like that. That's weird. Math. Okay, so I see math floor, toFixed, parse int. Yeah, so in programming, there's usually a lot of ways to do similar things. But if I went to like JavaScript operators, I'm gonna put MDN because I just want to go to MDN. Arithmetic operators. If we come over here, oh, am I already there? Is it not going to take me down the page? There we go. So there's a lot of them, right? So we, oh, don't tell me. Maybe I'm mixing up two different, well, JavaScript doesn't have, I can just test it, I guess. Oh, wrong one. Where was I? Right here. Okay, so sorry. I think I'm about to show you something that actually doesn't exist in JavaScript because it's in like a few other languages that I know offhand. Oh, did they not put it on there? Awesome. Or I missed it. So it's not on there. That is awesome. Okay, so there's another kind of division that a lot of languages have. So usually usually you have 55 and then slash is like, it will give you the decimal. It's like, it includes the decimal. If there is a decimal, it includes it, right? It'll give you the number. If it's a whole number, it'll be whole. If it has a decimal, it will include it. But there's also one called integer division. And you can basically put 2 slashes and it will chop off the decimal, which is kind of like a shorthand way, but there's math. Let me see if I do this right. Math.floor, which is built into JavaScript. So we could say, if I gave this thing a float number, like the one above, like if I passed it that value, it would give me back what they call floor. There's usually like ceiling, like you can think of it as ceiling as in up on the top and floor down on the ground, which means it's going to round all the way down to a whole number or all the way to the ceiling or all the way up to the next one. So usually if there is a floor, there's also a ceil. So if I do 9, 1, 6, 6, 6, like that, it gives me 1. So it rounds to the next whole number up. Floor rounds all the way down. It doesn't matter if it's past 0.5 or whatever you learned in math class. Like if it's past a 0.5, then, or if it is 0.5, then you always round up. It's not like that. So floor will round all the way down to a whole number. Ceil will go all the way up. So that is one way you could get a whole number out of a decimal. So that could be part of our solution. And then parse int. Wait a minute, is that a, sorry, you're gonna have to see me struggle with some of these for a minute just to make sure I'm not confusing languages here. Parse int, okay. It's not a function. Is it built in? It's just built in, isn't it? So parse int, cool, it's built in. It's just like a function built into JavaScript. So you can pass it a decimal and it will parse int. It's going to grab the leading integer, the whole number off of the front of it. So it's not going to round it. Basically just chops off everything, the decimal and everything after it. It just grabs that int. So these are all this, again, these are all just, you don't have to know all these off the top of your head. You just have to know one of them for now and then how to use it. So we really want, so we've got step 1 and step 2, right? We know how to get the hours, but there's like a catch to this, right? Not only do we need the hours off of it, but we need to make sure that it's like a whole number. So going back to this example, if we were to pass a 55 to this function, and we said, we want, this is what we want to get back, right? We want 0 hours. So basically, if I passed 55 and divided it by 0, I would get that. So I'm basically saying I don't care about that 0.9 at all. I just want the 0 because the modulus is going to get the 55 side of it, right? Gives me the 55. So I can get the 0, I can get the 55, and now I just need to assemble this thing into a string instead of an integer. And this will probably be like the easier part of the operations, I think. So, but step 1 kind of has a catch to it, right? Like there's the catch where we do division and it has the decimal in it. But modulus doesn't have a decimal attached to it. So we can do math.floor if you prefer. So we could use math.floor, or we could use the double slashes, which is integer division, or we could use parse int to get whole number. Make sure I'm saying get the whole number. Trying to choose my wording here just to make sure it makes sense. All right, so step 3, we need to convert these values into a string to return. So this value that comes out needs to be a string type, and there's a few ways we can do this. One way I haven't showed you, maybe I'll wait for the end. Yeah, I think I'll wait for the end to do it. So we could literally do this line by line the long way, just so because it might make more sense. Sometimes the longer way makes more sense. It's easier for newer folks to understand. And then the lines that are shorter that look more clever tend to be harder to read until you know how to use it. So we'll just do it a longer way. So I'm going to say, let my output string, the string that I want to output, it's going to be nothing at first, right? And I'm really going a long way here with it. And I can say output string, I feel like JavaScript might yell at me for this, but we're going to find out. I think it will auto typecast this number into a string for me, but that is totally an assumption. So we might see Chris fail right now. So output string, I want to I could do this on the first line, but I'm going to do it on the second line with this, how I'm doing it right now. So output string is, I'm going to reassign basically it again. And I want to do step one. I want to get my hours. So minutes is my parameter, the argument that was passed in. It should be some kind of a number like 55. And let's say I'm going to use parse int, right? I want to chop off, I'm going to use the parse int built in. Parse int. So the value that comes out of this is going to be a number still. It's still not a string. But output string, let me see if this makes sense right here. So if it's going to run the right side of the equal sign first, right? So it's going to perform this operation. It's going to take whatever output string previously was on line 19. It's going to add this number into that string, or it's going to try, and then it's going to resave it or reassign that value back to output string again. And maybe this is a good point to like just test that even just this bare minimum worked up to these 3 lines that we wrote besides the comments, that this worked. Like this is a perfectly valid point to stop and call your own function and pass it like 55 and then see what you get and see if it just fails, right? So, oops. So it gave me back 55. But what I really also want to make sure that type of thing, I want to check what the type is. And it says it's a string. That's good. So we've only put one value in there so far, but it is coming out as a string. So the next line is, I'm going to copy this line down here, just so I don't have to scroll up a lot. We'll put it right here. Our return value needs to look like this format, right? So I have the first number. Well, I have 55, which is what came in. This is wrong. This is wrong for the moment because we didn't perform the actual calculation yet. So I need to perform the calculation, right? So if I divide by 60 inside of here, hopefully it makes sense that the way that JavaScript reads this is it's going to run this calculation first and get the results of that, and it's going to basically inject it into this function, right? Like it's going to do these in a smart way. And once this parse int, it's going to return a value to the spot it's in, so that Python can compare this side, do the operation between these two sides. So it's basically the process that's happening here. And just so everyone can follow what exactly is happening here. So we're basically doing the operation of minutes divided by 60. So this could have been 55 divided by 60 if that's what we passed in. And then parse int is going to strip off that 0. So if I run it, I get a 0 now, which is what I want. That's the first part. So now I need a space, hours, and then my next. So basically this thing changes, right? And that thing changes. They're kind of like placeholder spots is how you can think about them. The rest of the sentence will kind of look the same, at least for as far as what I read up to the problem so far. It looks like there is like a 1 minute. I don't know if that's a typo or if they intentionally left it off to make it more challenging, but add another level of complexity. So we're going to add the next part, right? I'm going to say output string equals, and we're really going the long way here because there's a much shorter way to do this too. I want the output string to now be reassigned to whatever the output string was before this line. Plus, I want to add a space. I want to add hours, another space, and then I can basically concatenate a string here. And then I'm not going to add this part of it yet, right? So I'm going to run that again. So now I get a new return value, right? So we're now doing string concatenation piece by piece and line by line here. So I'm going to do the same thing to try to get the 55 minutes attached. So one more time again, output string is equal to the previous line. Plus, now we have to get our 55 minutes, which if we go back up here, we already did these two. We used Parse Int for that one. We need to get the modulus, and then we need to eventually return this string that we have built up over all of these lines, right? So we want minutes. We want minutes modulus, or modulo 60. And well, let's just see. It should run that right, but what happened? Did my session die? Oh yeah, probably. Let me rerun it. So 0 hours and 55. So I got my 55, I got the 0, I got part of the hours. So now the rest is basically just, concatenating the rest of what needs to be there, which is, I mean, we could have done it right here at the end. I could use single quotes too. So there's a space after and already. The 55 is going to go in, and I need minutes. So if I run that, now I get that result. So what happens if I switch? Don't just test one number. If you have multiple things you can test here, right? So 125, 70, test all of these if you can, if you've done enough work to get there. So all it is just swapping our values out and seeing how our code still runs. So 125, actually, sorry, let me go back. We're expecting 2 hours and 5 minutes to come back out of this. So let's run that. And we get 2 hours and 5 minutes. So 125 went in, and the same steps, the same reusable steps in this function have been applied to a different value. So it just took all of the same steps all over again to perform. So now we can just literally just swap out any values we want, and we'll still get that, right? We can try 121 and 75, and just make sure that all of these 1 hours and 15 minutes. But so maybe they did intentionally do it to where we need to do maybe a conditional check here, right? So maybe I need to conditionally set this last thing that gets appended, and maybe this first word that gets appended. So I'm gonna stop right here for the moment. We can finish the rest of this, but I just want to stop. So if anybody has questions up here, like I did a lot of stuff and said a lot of stuff in here, so you can ask questions and we can talk about it, and then I can go in and do the conditional if you want. So totally ask some questions. Looks like Phil had to go. Am I running over on time? I am 10 minutes over on time. Yeah, if y'all have to go, yeah, it's fine. I didn't mean to run for so long. But if you have questions, please ask them, and I'll try to wrap this up. And I can share these snippets in the Slack channel. There's a way to share code. Yep, there's a way to share code in there. Code snippets that you can like copy and paste over. So I can share all this code with you, and you can like tinker with it if you guys want to. But totally ask any questions if y'all have any, or if you don't, let me know if that was good or bad. if you feel better about at least that one challenge. There's a question to enlarge the screen. Can I?
That's from earlier when you had us muted. We were trying to get you to do that.
Let me enlarge that anymore. Everyone's so quiet. Or maybe I put everybody to sleep.
Hey, Chris, can you hear me?
Just checking the chat logs. You have to bounce too. Thanks. This is amazing. Thanks so much. Great job. Okay, thumbs up. Yeah, I mean, it's probably late for a lot of y'all. It's only 7 for me, so it's still early. If you have to go, please, take a break. This recording will be. I'll tack this one on to the last start of the session, and then we'll get it uploaded on YouTube, and then you can rewatch it and replay it as you want. And if anybody is hanging around for a little bit, I can stick around for a little bit longer. If anybody wants to cover something specific that they're having a problem with, I'll hang out for a little bit and we can do that. But yeah, feel free to go if you'd like. I don't want to hold anybody up, but I will stop recording right now.